A man who crawled 300 kilometers with a broken leg. His throat was torn open, his back was shredded meat, his legs snapped in half. Two men stood over him, took his rifle, his knife, his supplies. Then they walked away. August 1823, the American frontier. No hospital, no rescue, just wilderness, and 350 kilometers to the nearest fort. Hugh Glass should have died in that clearing. Instead, he crawled for 6 weeks with exposed bones and rotting flesh. Not to survive, for revenge. Because the men who abandoned him thought he was dead. They thought their secret was buried. They were wrong. This is documented history, and it begins with a grizzly bear that should have ended everything. August 1823, morning. Hugh Glass moved through dense brush along the Grand River, scouting ahead of his expedition. He was a fur trapper, a frontiersman, experienced and careful. Then the wind shifted. He smelled it half a second before he saw movement. Fur, massive, close. A grizzly bear, with cubs. He had walked between a mother and her offspring without knowing it. The bear charged. 700 pounds of maternal rage closed the distance in 3 seconds. Glass raised his rifle, fired. The shot hit but did not stop the animal. The bear struck him like an avalanche. Claws raked across his back, tearing through buckskin, skin, and muscle as if they were paper. Glass hit the ground. The bear was on top of him. Teeth closed around his throat. Glass felt his skin tear, felt warm blood flooding down his chest. His hand found his knife. He stabbed upward, once, twice, again. The bear bit down on his shoulder, bone crunched, then his leg snapped under the animal's weight. Other trappers arrived, gunfire cracked, the bear staggered, fell. Silence. Glass lay in the dirt, barely conscious. His throat was open, his back was shredded, his scalp hung in flaps, his leg was broken, bone gleamed white through torn flesh. "He's done," someone whispered. "No one survives this." They bandaged what they could, but everyone knew the truth. In the wilderness, injuries like this were a death sentence. The expedition leader made a decision. They could not wait. Hostile tribes controlled this territory, but they could not leave Glass to die alone like an animal. He offered $80 to any 2 men who would stay behind, wait for Glass to die, and bury him properly. John Fitzgerald volunteered immediately. He wanted the money. Jim Bridger, 19 years old, volunteered reluctantly. The rest of the expedition moved on. Glass lay dying. Fitzgerald and Bridger waited. A day passed, 2 days. Glass did not die. Fitzgerald grew desperate. They were in hostile territory. Every hour increased the risk of death. And for what? A corpse that refused to admit it was dead? On the 3rd day, Fitzgerald made a choice that would haunt the frontier for decades. He took Glass's rifle, his knife, his supplies. Bridger protested weakly, but Fitzgerald was already walking away. They left Hugh Glass lying in the dirt, alone, unarmed, dying. But Hugh Glass was not dead, and what he did next would defy every law of survival. Glass woke alone. He tried to call out. Only a wet, gurgling sound emerged from his ruined throat. Then he understood. They had left him, taken his weapons, left him to die. He tried to stand. His broken leg screamed. He collapsed. The wilderness around him was indifferent. The trees did not care. The wind kept moving, steady and relentless. Glass lay there and felt something shift inside him. Rage. Cold, calculating rage that burned slow and steady.
Fitzgerald and Bridger had stolen his dignity, his choice, his right to die on his own terms. The rage gave him clarity. He would not die here, not while those men walked free. He would crawl to Fort Kiowa, 350 kilometers away. He would find them. He would make them answer. The first challenge was immediate. He could not walk. But pain, Glass understood, was just information. It did not tell him what to do about it. He began with inventory. A torn shirt, no weapons, no supplies, no food. Water was first. The river was close. He dragged himself toward it, inch by inch, leaving a trail of blood. It took an hour to cover 20 feet. Food was next. He found berries, ate them slowly. His torn throat made swallowing excruciating. Then came wound care. This is where the story becomes almost unbearable. Glass's back was a ruin of torn flesh and exposed muscle. Infection was inevitable. In the early 1800s, infection killed more men than violence. But Glass had learned something during his years with native tribes. Maggots eat only dead tissue. He lay on his stomach and let flies land on his wounds. Within days, maggots appeared. They burrowed into the dead flesh, cleaning the wounds in a way that saved his life. He set his own broken leg, used branches as a splint. The pain was so intense he blacked out twice. When he woke, the leg was set, and the crawl began. 350 kilometers. To crawl that distance seemed impossible. Glass did not think about the distance. He thought about the next rock, the next tree, the next 10 feet of ground. He moved on his elbows and one good knee, dragging his broken leg behind him. His hands blistered, then bled, then calloused. Days blurred together. Time lost meaning. There was only movement, rest, movement again. He navigated by the sun and stars. He followed the river when he could. When terrain forced him away from water, he crawled through forests where every root was an obstacle. The first week was the hardest. His body was in shock. He developed a fever, hallucinated, saw Fitzgerald and Bridger laughing, saw his own grave. But every time his mind drifted toward surrender, the rage pulled him back. You will not die here. By the second week, his body began to adapt. His wounds started to close, the infection subsided, his strength stabilized. He caught a rattlesnake, killed it with a rock, ate it raw. He found roots, berries, anything edible. Sometimes he went days without food, but he kept crawling. The wilderness was not neutral, it was actively hostile, and the environment became his greatest enemy. The land wanted him dead. The heat during the day was crushing. The sun beat down on his exposed skin, blistering it, cooking him slowly. The cold at night was equally brutal. Without fire, Glass shivered through the darkness, burning calories he could not afford to lose. Then there were the animals. Wolves tracked him for days. They could smell the blood, the infection, the weakness. They circled at night, just beyond vision, waiting for him to falter. Glass slept with his back against trees, a rock in each hand, always listening, always ready. The rivers were another danger. With a broken leg, drowning was a real possibility. He tied himself to logs, kicked with his good leg, let the current carry him until he reached the far bank. Twice he nearly drowned. And always in the back of his mind was the knowledge that hostile tribes controlled this territory. If they found him weak and unarmed, he would die slowly. Every sound became a potential threat, every shadow a possible enemy. The wilderness was not background, it was an active adversary, testing him at every moment, looking for weakness. After 5 weeks of crawling, Glass reached a wider section of river. Near the bank, he found the remains of an old camp, scraps, a rusted knife blade, some cord. Glass used them to build a crude raft. For the first time in 6 weeks, he was not crawling. The current carried him downstream. Miles passed beneath him. His pace had just multiplied. Then, on the 7th day on the raft, Glass saw smoke, a camp. He steered toward it carefully. The camp belonged to friendly Sioux. When they saw him, skeletal, scarred, barely human, they were terrified. But they pulled him ashore, gave him food, cleaned his wounds properly for the first time since the attack. After several days, they pointed him toward Fort Kiowa, less than 50 kilometers away. Glass thanked them, then he continued on foot. His leg had healed enough that he could walk. He limped, every step hurt, but he walked. And then, on a cold morning in October 1823, Hugh Glass limped into Fort Kiowa.
The men at Fort Kiowa saw a ghost walk through their gates. Hugh Glass was unrecognizable, scarred, skeletal, his eyes hollow but burning with something that made hardened frontiersmen step back. When he spoke, his voice a rasp, and told them his name, several men dropped what they were holding. Glass? Hugh Glass? You're dead. Word spread within minutes. The man who had been abandoned, the man who should be a corpse, the man who crawled over 300 kilometers to stand here, alive, impossible, furious. A doctor examined his wounds and shook his head in disbelief. These injuries should have killed you 10 times over. Glass did not respond. He was here for 2 men. Where are they? Glass asked. Fitzgerald and Bridger. Where? The room went silent. Bridger's still in the area. Fitzgerald joined the army, Fort Atkinson. Glass absorbed this. Both were within reach. He found Jim Bridger first. Bridger was 19. When he saw Glass, his face went white. I wanted to stay, Bridger said, his voice breaking. Fitzgerald said you were going to die anyway. He said the Arikara would kill us. I didn't want to leave you. Glass stared at him, this boy who had been terrified and manipulated. Where's my rifle? Fitzgerald took it. Glass looked at Bridger for a long moment. You abandoned me, Glass said quietly. I will remember that. You will remember that. But you're just a boy, and I was a boy once too. He turned and walked away. Finding Fitzgerald was harder. Fort Atkinson was weeks away. When Glass arrived, he learned Fitzgerald had joined the U.S. Army. Killing a soldier was a federal crime. Glass would hang. Fitzgerald stood in the fort, surrounded by soldiers, untouchable. Glass confronted him anyway. You left me to die, Glass said. Fitzgerald said nothing. His eyes were cold, unrepentant.
Glass felt the rage inside him, the rage that had carried him 300 kilometers, and then he let it go. Not because Fitzgerald deserved forgiveness, but because carrying that rage any further would destroy what was left of Hugh Glass's humanity. "I hope you remember this," Glass said quietly. "I hope you see me crawling every time you close your eyes." Then he turned and walked away. Hugh Glass had survived the impossible. He had crawled out of his own grave, and in doing so, he became legend.